Hi, welcome to another Canto Roboflow training movie. This training movie demonstrates two new actions called rename file and rename folder, which are now available since Cumulus 11.01. In this workflow, I created a little hot folder workflow that will rename a file in the drop folder and will rename folders. To demonstrate it, I added here a rename file instruction, and in the rename file instruction I'm specifying a new file name. I defined in this workflow several steps that I want to demonstrate to you, so let's start with the rename file functionality. You might say, why do I have a rename file action? In the past, you already had in Roboflow the possibility to do a move of a file. So if you move the file to a new location, to a new file name, that could also be a rename. But in reality, a move in Roboflow, a move of a file in Roboflow, is actually a copy and then a delete, and not a real move. So that's why in this new functionality, the rename can be much faster if the source and the target are on the same share or in the same drive letter. The move or the rename is an actual native operating system move or rename and not a copy and delete. I have a little test file in here, and that's the test file that I am going to rename. So I do start, and the workflow will just prefix the name with the word rename. So as you can see, a very simple example of what the rename function can do. But the rename also has extra functionality, because the rename can also be a move. That means that the rename could be moving it to a different folder. So if in here I specify that I want to do a move of the file, then here in the workflow it will go into this section and it will actually call the rename action. But instead of just specifying the new name, it specifies a complete path. And as long as this stays within the same drive letter or share, it will be actually moving the file to the new location. And you're actually renaming the file path, and you're changing the file path. So that's what is going to happen. It's going to first rename the file in the first step, as we saw in the first example, and then after that it's going to move that file into what is called here the moved file folder. It is, however, important to know that the target should not exist. That is the same for the rename, otherwise the rename will fail. And it's not like other functionalities that might add a 1 at the end of the name if the target already exists. No. Same with the rename function is that before you do the rename, you should delete it and make sure that the target does not exist. Well, exactly the same for the target. If you're moving a file to a target folder, make sure that the target folder exists. You cannot do a rename to a different folder if the folder does not exist. And so before this instruction, you must definitely do a rename. So if I run the workflow now, the file that we're going to process is here, and I say start. First a rename like we saw in the previous loop, and then a rename of the folder, of the file actually, not of the folder. Show log, and what I see is step 1, I renamed the file image to this, and then step 2 is that I moved it to that folder with the same instruction. And so I can change the name and move it in one instruction, or I can just move the file itself. And so if I have a look now, in the folder, I see that it is in the moved file, and in the rename, it's renamed to this. So let's do this again. In another example, Shift. Okay, so step 3 is now I'm going to rename the folder, which means it first renames the file, then moves the file to a certain folder, and then it's going to rename that folder. So that's the renamed folder action that we have here. In here we have a rename folder action, and that's the one we're going to use. In this folder, we're just going to call the renamed folder renamed folder, and so that way we can see that the folder that is actually called moved is now going to be called renamed. We still have our test file, and here we go. Start. Show log. Step 1, I renamed image to renamed. Step 2, I moved the renamed file to a folder called renamed file. And then 3, I renamed the folder that was called renamed file to renamed folder. So as end result, you can see that this is now called renamed folder, and that we have the renamed file in there. And so I can change the file name again, Ctrl X and Ctrl V. And then Shift delete. The last step, step 4, is that we can move a folder. And so instead of specifying just a new folder name, you can specify a complete new path, and it will move the complete file. This is a very useful functionality if you need to move a file. In the past, what we would do is we had to move each individual file in there. Even if there were subfolders, you had to process the subfolders, etc., etc. It was a very complicated process. Now, with one instruction, you can pick up a file and say, look, I'm moving it to here. And one simple instruction instead of processing the content. Be careful if you have files in those folders that are referenced to by asset reference in records. This is just moving the file on the file system. This is not telling Cumulus that the file was moved, and that could be a separate process. So I'm going to set this to the last example, step 4 being move folder. So like this, and I'm going to check I still have my file here, so I can say start. Show log, and I can say step 1, step 2, step 3, and then step 4 is moving the folder that was called, renamed folder to a folder that is called moved folder. And so I'm moving actually this folder inside this folder. And so just as an example. So here we go. The starting point is still the file here. And so, I first need to Ctrl X, Ctrl V, and I need to delete this. And let's change the name back to original. There we go. Start. Show log. renamed, moved, renamed, moved. So I did it twice. Sorry for the confusion, but you can see the result. The moved folder is inside the renamed folder and has the renamed file. So this was the complete process, and you can see that it has a lot of benefits of moving a folder instead of having to move each element, each file inside that folder. So thank you for joining this training movie, and see you in the next one.